This is The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot, a remarkable new theory of reality that explains the paranormal abilities of the mind, the latest frontiers of physics, and the unsolved riddles of brain and body. This is chapter 1. I can find that shit. Skipping the acknowledgements, you don't need that. We'll start here. In the movie Star Wars, Luke Skywalker's adventure begins when a beam of light shoots out of the robot R2-D2 and projects a miniature three-dimensional image of Princess Leia. Luke watches spellbound as the ghostly sculpture of light begs for someone named Obi-Wan Kenobi to come to her assistance. Okay, sorry, I have anxiety. The image is a hologram, a three-dimensional picture made with the aid of a laser, and the technological magic required to make such images is remarkable. But what is even more astounding is that some scientists are beginning to believe the universe itself is a kind of giant hologram, a splendidly detailed illusion no more or less real than the image of Princess Leia that starts Luke on his quest. Put another way, there's evidence to suggest that our world and everything in it, from snowflakes to maple trees to falling stars and spinning electrons, are also only ghostly images, projections from a level of reality so beyond our own, it is literally beyond both space and time. The main architects of this astonishing idea are two of the world's most eminent thinkers, University of London physicist David Bohm, a protege of Einstein's and one of the world's most respected quantum physicists, and Carl Pribram, a neurophysiologist at Stanford University and author of the classic neuropsychological textbook Languages of the Brain. Intriguingly, Bohm and Pribram arrived at their conclusions independently and while working from two very different directions. Bohm became convinced of the universe's holographic nature only after years of dissatisfaction with the standard theory's inability to explain all of the phenomenon encountered in quantum physics. Pribram became convinced because of the failure of standard theories of the brain to explain various neurophysiological puzzles. However, after arriving at their views, Bohm and Pribram quickly realized the holographic model explained a number of other mysteries as well, including the apparent inability of any theory, no matter how comprehensive, ever to account for all the phenomena encountered in nature, the ability of individuals with hearing in only one ear to determine the direction from which a sound originates, and our ability to recognize the face of someone we have not seen for many years, even if that person has changed considerably in the interim. But the most staggering thing about holographic model was that it suddenly made sense of a wide range of phenomena so elusive they generally have been categorized outside the province of scientific understanding. These include telepathy, precognition, mystical feelings of oneness with the universe, and even psychokinesis, or the ability of the mind to move physical objects without anyone touching them. Indeed, it quickly became apparent to the ever-growing number of scientists who reading makes me tired, who came to embrace the holographic model, that it helped explain virtually all paranormal and mystical experiences. And in the last half dozen years or so, it has continued to galvanize researchers and shed light on an increasing number of previously inexplicable phenomena. For example, in 1980, University of Connecticut psychologist Dr. Kenneth Ring proposed that near-death experiences could be explained by the holographic model. Ring, who is president of the International Association of Near-Death Studies, believes such experiences, as well as death itself, are really nothing more than the shifting of a person's consciousness from one level of the hologram of reality to another. In 1985, Dr. Stanislav Grof, chief of psychiatric research at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center and an assistant professor of psychiatry at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, published a book in which he concluded that existing neurophysiological models of the brain are inadequate and only a holographic model can explain such things as archetypal experiences, encounters with the collective unconscious, and other unusual phenomena experienced during altered states of consciousness. At the 1987 annual meeting of the Association for the Study of Dreams, also fire, held in Washington, D.C., physicist Fred Alan Wolf delivered a talk in which he asserted that the holographic model explains lucid dreams. Oh, God. Okay. Can't stop yawning. Unusually vivid dreams in which the dreamer realizes he or she is awake. Wolf believes that such dreams are actually visits to parallel realities, and the holographic model will ultimately allow us to develop a physics of consciousness, which will enable us to explore more fully these other dimensional levels of existence. In 1987, a book entitled Synchronicity, The Bridge Between Matter and Mind, Dr. F. David Pete, Ray Pete? A physicist at Queen's University in Canada, asserted that synchronicities, coincidences that are so unusual and so psychologically meaningful they don't seem to be the result of chance alone, can be explained by the holographic model. Pete believes such coincidences are actually flaws in the fabric of reality. They reveal that our thought processes are much more intimately connected to the physical world than has been hitherto suspected. These are only a few of the thought-provoking ideas that will be explored in this book. Many of these ideas are extremely controversial. Indeed, the holographic model itself is highly controversial and is by no means accepted by a majority of scientists. Nonetheless, and as we shall see, many important and impressive thinkers do support it and believe it may be the most accurate picture of reality we have to date. The holographic model has also received some dramatic experimental support. In the field of neurophysiology, numerous studies have corroborated Pribram's various predictions about the holographic nature of memory and perception. Similarly, in 1982, a landmark experiment performed by a research team led by physicist Elaine Aspect, cool name, at the Institute of Theoretical and Applied Optics in Paris, demonstrated that the web of subatomic particles that compose our physical universe, the very fabric of reality itself, possess what appears to be an undeniable holographic property. These findings will also be discussed in the book. In addition to the experimental evidence, several other things add weight to the holographic hypothesis. Perhaps the most important considerations are the characters and achievement of the two men who originated the idea. Early in their careers, and before the holographic model was even a glimmer in their thoughts, each amassed accomplishments that would inspire most researchers to spend the rest of their academic lives resting on their laurels. In the 1940s, Pribram did pioneering work on the limbic system, a region of the brain involved in emotions and behavior. Bohm's work in plasma physics in the 1950s is also considered landmark. Oh, I'm sorry, I cannot stop yawning. But even more significantly, each has distinguished himself in another way. It is a way even the most accomplished men and women can seldom call their own. For it is measured not by mere intelligence or even talent. It is measured by courage, the tremendous resolve it takes to stand up for one's convictions even in the face of overwhelming opposition. Don't tell that to the Delulu girls. No, I'm just kidding. While he was a graduate student, Bohm did doctoral work with Robert Oppenheimer. Later in 1951, when Oppenheimer came under the perilous scrutiny of Senator Joseph McCarthy's Committee of Un-American Activities, also awesome, Senator Joseph McCarthy's Committee of Un-American Activities. Bohm was called to testify against him and refused. Oh, hell yeah. As a result, he lost his job at Princeton and never again taught in the United States, moving first to Brazil and then to London. Oh my God. Okay. Early in his career, Pribram faced a similar test of mettle. In 1935, a Portuguese neurologist named Egas Moniz devised what he believed was the perfect treatment for mental illness. Okay. He discovered that by boring into an individual's skull, sounds like a great best practice, with a surgical pick and severing the prefrontal cortex from the rest of the brain, he could make the most troublesome patients docile. He called the procedure a prefrontal lobotomy, and by the 1940s it had become such a popular medical technique that Moniz was awarded the Nobel Prize. Okay. In the 1950s, the procedure's popularity continued, and it became a tool, like the McCarthy hearings, to stamp out cultural undesirables. So accepted was its use for this purpose that the surgeon Walter Freeman, the most outspoken advocate for the procedure in the United States, wrote unashamedly that lobotomies made good American citizens out of society's misfits, schizophrenics, homosexuals, and radicals, he says. During this time, Pribram came on the medical scene. However, unlike many of his peers, Pribram felt it was wrong to tamper so recklessly with the brain of another. So deep were his convictions that while working as a young neurosurgeon in Jacksonville, Florida, he opposed the accepted medical wisdom of the day and refused to allow any lobotomies to be performed in the ward he was overseeing. Later at Yale, he maintained his controversial stance, and his then radical views very nearly lost him his job. Bohm and Pribram's commitment to stand up for what they believe in, regardless of the consequences, is also evident in the holographic model. As we shall see, placing their not inconsiderable reputations behind such a controversial idea is not the easiest path either could have taken. Both their courage and the vision they have demonstrated in the past again add weight to the holographic idea. One final piece of evidence in favor, and I don't feel like you've given the evidence yet, in favor of the holographic model is the paranormal itself. This is no small point, for in the last several decades, a remarkable body of evidence has accrued suggesting that our current understanding of reality, the solid and comforting sticks and stones picture of the world we all learned about in high school science class, is wrong. Because these findings cannot be explained by any of our standard scientific models, science has in the main ignored them. However, the volume of evidence has reached the point where this is no longer a tenable situation. To give just one example, in 1987, physicist Robert G. Jahn and clinical psychologist Brenda J. Doon, both at Princeton University, announced that after a decade of rigorous experimentation by their Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory, they had accumulated unequivocal evidence that the mind can psychically interact with physical reality. More specifically, Jean and Doon found that through mental concentration alone, human beings are able to affect the way certain kinds of machines operate. Interesting. This is an astounding finding, and one that cannot be accounted for in terms of our standard picture of reality. So true. It can be explained by the holographic view, however. Conversely, because paranormal events cannot be accounted for by our current scientific understandings, they cry out for a new way of looking at the universe, a new scientific paradigm. In addition to showing how the holographic model can account for the paranormal, the book will also examine how mounting evidence in favor of the paranormal in turn actually seems to necessitate the existence of such a model. Okay. The fact that the paranormal cannot be explained by our current scientific worldview is only one of the reasons it remains so controversial. Another is that psychic functioning is often very difficult to pin down in the lab, and this has caused many scientists to conclude it therefore does not exist. This apparent elusiveness will also be discussed in the book. An even more important reason is that contrary to what many of us have come to believe, science is not prejudice-free. I first learned this a number of years ago when I asked a well-known physicist what he thought about a particular parapsychological experiment. The physicist, who had a reputation for being skeptical of the paranormal, looked at me with great authority, said the results revealed no evidence of any psychic functioning whatsoever. I had not yet seen the results, but because I respected the physicist's intelligence and reputation, I accepted his judgment without question. Later, when I examined the results for myself, I was stunned to discover the experiment had produced very striking evidence of psychic ability. I realized that even well-known scientists can possess biases and blind spots. Only then. Okay. Unfortunately, this is a situation that occurs often in the investigation of the paranormal. In a recent article in American Psychologist, Yale psychologist Irvin L. Child examined how a well-known series of ESP dream experiments conducted at the Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn, New York, had been treated by the scientific establishment. Despite the dramatic evidence supported of ESP uncovered by the experimenters, Child found that their work had been almost completely ignored by the scientific community. Even more distressing, in the handful of scientific publications that had bothered to comment on the experiments, he found the research had been so severely distorted, its importance was completely obscured. How is this possible? One reason is science is not always as objective as we would like to believe. We view scientists with a bit of awe, and when they tell us something, we are convinced it must be true. We forget they are only human and subject to the same religion, philosophical, and cultural prejudices as the rest of us. This is unfortunate, for as this book will show, there is a great deal of evidence that the universe encompasses considerably more than our current worldview allows. But why is science so resistant to the paranormal in particular? This is a more difficult question. In commenting on the resistance he experienced to his own unorthodox views on health, Yale surgeon Dr. Bernie S. Siegel, author of the best-selling book Love, Medicine, and Miracles, asserts that it is because people are addicted to their beliefs. Siegel says that this is why when you try to change someone's belief, they act like an addict. There seems to be a good deal of truth to Siegel's observation, which perhaps is why so many of civilization's greatest insights and advances have at first been greeted with such passionate denial. We are addicted to our beliefs, and we do act like addicts when someone tries to wrest from us the powerful opium of our dogmas. Type shit. And since Western science has devoted several centuries to not believing in the paranormal, it is not going to surrender its addiction lightly. I am lucky. I have always known there was more to the world than is generally accepted. Queen. I grew up in a psychic family, and from an early age I experienced firsthand many of the phenomena that will be talked about in this book. Occasionally, and when it is relevant to the topic being discussed, oh my fucking God. Okay. I will relate a few of my own experiences. Although they can only be viewed as anecdotal evidence, for me they have been... Where'd it go? For me, they have provided the most compelling proof of all that we live in a universe we are only... For me, they have provided the most compelling proof of all that we live in a universe are only just beginning to fathom. I don't get that sentence. And I include them because of the insight they offer. Lastly, because the holographic concept is still very much an idea in the making and is a mosaic of many different points of view and pieces of evidence, some have argued that it should not be called a model or theory until these disparate points of view are integrated into a more unified whole. As a result, some researchers refer to the ideas as the holographic paradigm. Others prefer holographic analogy, holographic metaphor, and so on. In this book, and for the sake of diversity, I have employed all of these expressions, including holographic model and holographic theory, but do not mean to imply that the holographic idea has achieved the status of a model or theory in the strictest sense of these terms. In this same vein, it is important to note that although Bohm and Pribram are the originators of the holographic idea, they do not embrace all of the views and conclusions put forward in this book. Rather, this is a book that looks not only at Bohm and Pribram's theories, but at the ideas and conclusions of numerous researchers who have been influenced by the holographic model and who have interpreted it in their own sometimes controversial ways. Throughout this book, I also discuss various ideas from quantum physics, the branch of physics that studies subatomic particles, electrons, protons, and so on. Because I've written on this subject before, I am aware that some people are intimidated by the term quantum physics, and they are afraid they will not be able to understand its concepts. My experience has taught me that even those who do not know any mathematics are able to understand the kinds of ideas from physics that are touched upon in this book. You do not even need a background in science. All you need is an open mind if you happen to glance at a page and see a scientific term you do not know. I have kept such terms down to a minimum, and on those occasions when it was necessary to use one, I always explain it before continuing on with the text. So don't be afraid. Once you have overcome your fear of the water, I think you'll find swimming among quantum physics' strange and fascinating ideas much easier than you may have thought. I think you'll also find that pondering a few of these ideas might even change the way you look at the world. In fact, it is my hope that the ideas contained in the following chapters will change the way you look at the world. It is with this humble desire that I offer this book. Part 1. A remarkable new view of reality. Sit down before facts like a little child and be prepared to give up every preconceived notion. Follow humbly wherever and to whatever abyss nature leads, or you shall learn nothing. T.H. Huxley. Chapter 1. The brain is a hologram. It isn't that the world of appearances is wrong, it is apparent that there aren't objects out there at one level of reality. It's that if you penetrate through the look at the universe with a holographic system, you arrive at a different view, a different reality, and that other reality can explain things that have hitherto, they love hitherto in this book, remained remained inexplicable scientifically. Paranormal phenomena, synchronicities, and apparently meaningful coincidence of events. Carl Pribram in an interview in Psychology Today. The puzzle that first started Pribram on the road to formulating his holographic model was the question of how and where memories are stored in the brain. In the early 1940s, when he first became interested in this mystery, it was generally believed that memories were localized in the brain. In the early 1940s, when he first became interested in this mystery, it was generally believed that memories were localized in the brain. Did I just say that? Each memory a person had, such as the memory of the last time you saw your grandmother, or the memory of the fragrance of a gardenia you sniffed when you were 16, was believed to have a specific location somewhere amongst the brain cells. Such memory traces were called engrams, and although no one knew what an engram was made of, whether it was a neuron or perhaps even a special kind of molecule, most scientists were confident it was only a matter of time before one would be found. There were reasons for this confidence. Research conducted by Canadian neurosurgeon Wilder Penfield in the 1920s had offered convincing evidence that specific memories did have specific locations in the brain. One of the most unusual features of the brain is that the object itself doesn't sense pain directly. As long as the scalp and the skull have been deadened with a local anesthetic, surgery can be performed on the brain of a fully conscious person without causing any pain. In a series of landmark experiments, Penfield used this fact to his advantage. While operating on the brains of epileptics, he would electrically stimulate various areas of their brain cells. To his amazement, he found that when he stimulated the temporal lobes, the region of the brain behind the temples, of one of his fully conscious patients, they re-experienced memories of past episodes from their lives in vivid detail. One man suddenly relived a conversation he had had with friends in South Africa. A boy heard his mother talking on the telephone, and after several touches from Penfield's electrode, was able to repeat her entire conversation. A woman found herself in her kitchen and could hear her son playing outside. Even when Penfield tried to mislead his patients by patients by telling them he was stimulating a different area when he was not, he found that when he touched the same spot, it always evoked the same memory. In this book, The Mystery of the Mind, published in 1975, just shortly before his death, he wrote, "It was evident at once that these were not dreams. They were electrical activations of the sequential record of consciousness, a record that had been laid down during the patient's earlier experience. The patient relived all that he had been aware of in that earlier period of time as in a moving picture flashback." From his research, Penfield concluded that everything we have ever experienced is recorded in our brain, from every stranger's face we have glanced at in a crowd to every spider web we gazed at as a child. That's going to make me cry. He reasoned that this was why memories of so many insignificant events kept cropping up in his sampling. If our memory is a complete record of even the most mundane of our day-to-day experiences, it is reasonable to assume that dipping randomly into such a massive chronicle would produce a good deal of trifling information. As a young neurosurgery resident, Pribram had no reason to doubt Penfield's engram theory, but then something happened that was to change his thinking forever. In 1946, he went to work with the great neuropsychologist Carl Lashley at the Yerkes Laboratory of Primate Biology, then in Orange Park, Florida. For over 30 years, Lashley had been involved in his own ongoing search for the elusive mechanisms responsible for memory, and there Pribram was able to witness the fruits of Lashley's labors firsthand. What was startling was that not only had Lashley failed to produce any evidence of the engram, but his research actually seemed to pull the rug out from under all of Penfield's findings. Well, shit. Okay. What Lashley had done was to train rats to perform a variety of tasks, such as run a maze. Then he surgically removed various portions of their brain and retested them. His aim was to literally cut out the area of the rats' brains containing the memory of their maze-running ability. To his surprise, he found that no matter what portion of their brains he cut out, he could not eradicate their memories. Often the rats' motor skills were impaired and they stumbled clumsily through the mazes, but even with massive portions of their brains removed, their memories remained stubbornly intact. For Pribram, these were incredible findings. If memories possess specific locations in the brain, in the same way that books possess specific locations on library shelves, why didn't Lashley's surgical plunderings have any effect on them? For Pribram, the only answer seemed to be that memories were not localized at specific brain spots, but at specific brain sites, but were somehow spread out or distributed throughout the brain as a whole. The problem was that he knew of no mechanism or process that could account for such a state of affairs. Lashley was even less certain and later wrote, "I sometimes feel, in reviewing the evidence on the localization of the memory trace, that the necessary conclusion is that learning just is not possible at all. Nevertheless, in spite of such evidence against it, learning does sometimes occur." Some bitches really be proving that. In 1948, Pribram was offered a position at Yale, and before leaving, he helped write up 30 years of Lashley's monumental research. The breakthrough. At Yale, Pribram continued to ponder the idea that memories were distributed throughout the brain, and the more he thought about it, the more convinced he became. After all, patients who had had portions of their brains removed for medical reasons never suffered the loss of specific memories. Removal of a large section of the brain might cause a patient's memory to become generally hazy, but no one ever came out of surgery with any selective memory loss. Similarly, individuals who had received head injuries in car collisions and other accidents never forgot half of their family or half of a novel they have read. Even removal of sections of the temporal lobes, the area of the brain that had figured so prominently in Penfield's research, didn't create any gaps in a person's memories. Pribram's thinking was further solidified by his and other researchers' inability to duplicate Penfield's findings when stimulating brains, other than those of epileptics. Even Penfield himself was unable to duplicate his results in non-epileptic patients. Despite the growing evidence that memories were distributed, Pribram was still at a loss as to how the brain might accomplish such a seemingly magical feat. Then, in the mid-1960s, an article he read in Scientific American describing the first construction of a hologram hit him like a thunderbolt. Not only was the concept of holography holography. Holography dazzling, but it provided a solution to the puzzle with which he had been wrestling. To understand why Pribram was so excited, it is necessary to understand a little more about holograms. One of the things that makes holography possible is a phenomenon known as interference. Okay, this is important. This is side note. This is important. If you're not listening, listen now. Interference is the crisscrossing pattern that occurs when two or more waves, such as waves of water, ripple through each other. For example, if you drop a pebble into a pond, it will produce a series of concentric waves that expands outward. If you drop two pebbles into a pond, you will get two sets of waves that expand and pass through one another. The complex arrangement of crests and troughs that result from such collisions is known as an interference pattern. Okay. A hologram is produced when a single laser light is split into two separate beams. The first beam is bounced off the object to be photographed. Then the second beam is allowed to collide with the reflected light of the first. When this happens, they create an interference pattern, which is then recorded on a piece of film. To the naked eye, the image on the film looks nothing at all like the object photographed. In fact, it even looks a little like the concentric rings that form when a handful of pebbles is tossed into a pond. See figure 2. You guys can't. But as soon as another laser beam, or in some instances just a bright light source, is shined through the film, a three-dimensional image of the original object reappears. The three-dimensionality of such images is often eerily convincing. You can actually walk around a holographic projection and view it from different angles as you would a real object. However, if you reach out and try to touch it, your hand will waft right through it and you will discover there's really nothing there. Okay. If you can look at a holographic plate image, I would do that now on your Google. Okay. Three-dimensionality is not the only remarkable aspect of holograms. If a piece of holographic film containing the image of an apple is cut in half and then illuminated by a laser, each half will still be found to contain the entire image of the apple. Even if the halves are divided again and then again, an entire apple can still be reconstructed from each small portion of the film, although the images will get hazier as the portions get smaller. Unlike normal photographs, each small fragment of a piece of holographic film contains all the information recorded in the whole. Think about that. This was precisely the feature that got Pribram so excited, for it offered at last a way of understanding how memories could be distributed rather than localized in the brain. If it was possible for every portion of a piece of holographic film to contain all the information necessary to create the whole image, then it seemed equally possible for every part of the brain to contain all of the information necessary to recall a whole memory. What does this say? It should be noted that this astounding trait is common only to pieces of holographic film whose images are invisible to the naked eye. If you buy a piece of holographic film or an object containing a piece of holographic film in a store and can see a three-dimensional image in it without any special kind of illumination, do not cut it in half. You will only end up with pieces of the original image. Okay, good to know. Okay. Vision also is holographic. We're on to the next section. Memory is not the only thing the brain may process holographically. Another of Lashley's discoveries was that the visual centers of the brain were also surprisingly resistant to surgical excision, even after removing as much as 90% of a rat's visual cortex. That's a lot. The part of the brain that receives and interprets what the eye sees. He found it could still perform tasks requiring complex visual skills. Similarly, research conducted by Pribram revealed that as much as 98% of a cat's optic nerves, poor cat, can be severed without seriously impairing its ability to perform complex visual tasks. Okay. Such a situation was tantamount to believing that a movie audience could still enjoy a motion picture even after 90% of the movie screen was missing, and his experiments presented once again a serious challenge to the standard understanding of how vision works. According to the leading theory of the day, there was a one-to-one correspondence between the image the eye sees and the way that the image is represented in the brain. In other words, when we look at a square, it was believed that the electrical activity in our visual cortex also possesses the form of a square. Interesting. Although findings such as Lashley's seemed to deal a death blow to this idea, Pribram was not satisfied. While he was at Yale, he devised a series of experiments to resolve the matter and spent the next 7 years carefully measuring the electrical activity in the brains of monkeys when they performed various visual tasks. He discovered that not only did no such one-to-one correspondence exist, but there wasn't even a discernible pattern to the sequence in which the electrodes fired. Okay, I'm going to read that previous paragraph again, because I wasn't actually paying attention. Such a situation was tantamount to believing that a movie audience could still enjoy a motion picture even after 90% of the movie screen was missing, and his experiments presented once again a serious challenge to the standard understanding of how vision works. According to the leading theory of the day, there is a one-to-one correspondence between the image the eye sees and the way that the image is represented in the brain. In other words, when we look at a square, it was believed the electrical activity in our visual cortex also possesses the form of a square. Okay, so that's the theory that Pribram and Lashley are like, that's cap. Okay. Let's go back to the other one. So Pribram and Ashley stated that not only did no such one-to-one correspondence exist, the square to the square, but there wasn't even a discernible pattern to the sequence in which the electrodes fired. He wrote of his findings, these experimental results are incompatible with a view that a photographic-like image becomes projected onto the cortical surface. Okay. Oh, that's where I was last time. Once again, the resistance the visual cortex displayed towards surgical excision suggested that, like memory, vision was also distributed. And after Pribram became... I'm so sorry. Okay. And after Pribram became aware of I keep wanting to say holography, he began to wonder if it too was holographic. The whole and every part nature of a hologram certainly seemed to explain how so much of the visual cortex could be removed without affecting the ability to perform visual tasks. If the brain was processing images by employing some kind of internal hologram, even a very small piece of the hologram could still reconstruct the whole of what the eyes were seeing. It also explained the lack of any one-to-one correspondence between the external world and the brain's electrical activity. Again, if the brain was using holographic principles to process visual information, there would be no more one-to-one correspondence between electrical activity and the images seen than there was between the meaningless swirl of interference patterns on a piece of holographic film and the image that the film encoded. The only question that remained was what wave-like phenomenon the brain might be using to create such internal holograms. As soon as Pribram considered the question, he thought of a possible answer. It was known that the electrical communications that take place between the brain's nerve cells, or neurons, do not occur alone. Neurons possess branches like little trees, and when an electrical message reaches the end of one of these branches, it radiates outward, as does the ripple in a pond. Because neurons are packed together so densely, these expanding ripples of electricity, also a wave-like phenomenon, are constantly crisscrossing one another. Okay, fire. When Pribram remembered this, he realized that they were most assuredly creating an almost endless and kaleidoscopic array of interference patterns. And these in turn might be what give the brain its holographic properties. The hologram was there all the time in the wavefront nature of brain cell connectivity, observed Pribram. We simply hadn't had the wit to realize it. Other puzzles explained by the holographic brain model. Okay, get that yawn out. Okay. I'm stretching now. Okay, all right. Keep it moving. Pribram published his first article on the possible holographic nature of the brain in 1966 and continued to expand and refine his ideas during the next several years. As he did, and as other researchers became aware of his theory, it was quickly realized that the distributed nature of memory and vision is not the only neurophysiological puzzle the holographic model can explain. Okay. I got hiccups. Oh shit. The vastness of our memory. Holography also explains how our brains can store so many memories in so little space. The brilliant Hungarian-born physicist and mathematician John von Neumann, Neumann once calculated that over the course of the average human lifetime, the brain stores something on the order of 2.8 by 10 to the 20th, whatever that's called, 10 to the 20th, or, I don't know, it's definitely over a trillion, bits of information. This is a staggering amount of information. Right. And the brain researchers have long struggled to come up with a mechanism that explains such a vast capability. Interestingly, holograms also possess a fantastic capacity for information storage. By changing the angle at which the two lasers strike a piece of photographic film, it's possible to record many different images on the same surface. Any image thus recorded can be retrieved simply by illuminating the film with a laser beam possessing the same angle as the original two beams. By employing this method, researchers have calculated that a 1-inch square of film can store the same amount of information in 50 Bibles. I don't think a Bible is a good unit of measurement, but maybe that just shows my cultural lacking. Our ability to both recall and forget. Pieces of holographic film containing multiple images, such as those described above, also provide a way of understanding our ability to both recall and forget. When such a piece of film is held in a laser beam and tilted back and forth, the various images it contains appear and disappear in a glittering stream. It has been suggested that our ability to remember is analogous to shining a laser beam on such a piece of film and calling up a particular image. Similarly, when we are unable to recall something, this may be equivalent to shining various beams on a piece of multiple image film, but failing to find the right angle to call up the image slash memory for which we are researching. We are searching. Next section, associative memory. In Proust's Swan's Way, I don't know. The book is called Swan's Way. Wait a minute. Okay, never mind. A sip of tea and a bite of a small scallop-shaped cake known as Petite Madeleine, I don't know, caused the narrator to find himself suddenly flooded with the memories from his past. At first he is puzzled, but then slowly, after much effort on his part, he remembers that his aunt used to give him tea and madeleines when he was a little boy, and it is this association that has stirred his memory. We have all had similar experiences, a whiff of a particular food being prepared, or a glimpse of some long-forgotten object that suddenly evokes some scene out of our past. The holographic idea offers a further analogy for the associative tendencies of memory. This is illustrated by yet another kind of holographic recording technique. First, the light of a single laser beam is bounced off two objects simultaneously, say an easy chair and a smoking pipe. The light bounced off each object is then allowed to collide, and the resulting interference pattern is captured on film. Then, whenever the easy chair is illuminated with laser light and the light that reflects off the easy chair is passed through the film, a three-dimensional image of the pipe will appear. Conversely, whenever the same is done with the pipe, a hologram of the easy chair appears. Wait, what? Okay, I'm reading that one again. The holographic... I'm reading this again. says, I get it, but I don't. He's talking about the Madeline and the tea, floods the guy's memories of his past. Okay, we have all had similar experiences. A whiff of a particular food being prepared, or a glimpse of some long-forgotten object that suddenly evokes some scene out of our past. The holographic idea offers a further analogy for the associative tendencies of memory. Okay, this is illustrated by yet another kind of holographic recording technique. First, the light of a single laser beam is bounced off two objects simultaneously, say an easy chair and a smoking pipe. The light bounced off each object is then allowed to collide, and the resulting interference pattern is captured on film. Okay, I get it. Then, whenever the easy chair is illuminated with laser light, and the light that reflects off the easy chair is passed through the film, a three-dimensional image of the pipe will appear. Okay. Conversely, whenever the same is done with the pipe, a hologram of the easy chair appears. So, if our brain functions holographically, a similar process may be responsible for the way certain objects evoke specific memories from our past. I mean, it makes sense. In theory. Our ability to recognize familiar things. At first glance, our ability to recognize familiar things may not seem so unusual, but brain researchers have long realized it is quite a complex ability. For example, the absolute certainty we feel when we spot a familiar face in a crowd of several hundred people is not just a subjective emotion, but appears to be caused by an extremely fast and reliable form of information processing in our brain. In a 1970 article in the British science magazine Nature, physicist Peter von Heerden proposed that a type of holography known as recognition holography, offers a way, I want to say holography so bad. Offers a way of understanding this ability. In recognition holography, a holographic image. In recognition holography, a holographic image of an object is recorded in the usual manner, save that the laser beam is bounced off a special kind of mirror known as a focusing mirror, before it is allowed to strike the unexposed film. If a second object, similar but not identical to the first, is bathed in laser light, and the light is bounced off the mirror and onto the film after it has been developed, a bright point of light will appear on the film. The brighter and sharper the point of the light, the greater the degree of similarity between the first and second objects. Interesting. If the two objects are If the two objects are completely dissimilar, no point of light will appear. By placing a light-sensitive photocell behind the holographic film, one can actually use the setup as a mechanical recognition system. I feel like I have to read that again, but I don't want to. What do you think about this? Okay, I'm just going to move on. Let's just keep it moving. A similar technique known as interference holography, may also explain how we can recognize both the familiar and unfamiliar features of an image, such as the face of someone we have not seen for many years. In this technique, an object is viewed through a piece of holographic film containing its image. When this is done, any feature of the object When this is done, any feature of the object that has changed since its image was originally recorded will reflect light differently. Any individual looking through the film is instantly aware of both how the object has changed and how it has remained the same. The technique is so sensitive that even the pressure of a finger on a block of granite shows up immediately, and the process has been found to have practical applications in materials testing industry. Okay. Photographic memory. In 1972, Harvard Vision researchers what page are we on? Okay, we're going to go to 30. In 1972, Harvard Vision researchers Daniel Pollan and Michael Trachtenberg proposed that the holographic brain theory may explain why people possess photographic memories, also known as eidetic memories. Eidetic memories? EIDETIC memories. Typically, individuals with photographic memories will spend a few moments scanning the scene they wish to memorize. When they want to see the scene again, they project a mental image of it, either with their eyes closed or as they gaze at a blank wall or screen. In a study of one such individual, a Harvard art history professor named Elizabeth, Pollen and Trachtenberg found that the mental images she projected were so real to her that when she read an image off a page from Goethe's Faust, her eyes moved as if she were reading a real page. Okay, photographic memory. Okay. Oh, photographic memory, eidetic memories. Okay. Nothing that the image stored in a fragment of holographic film gets hazier. Noting that the image stored in a fragment of holographic film gets hazier as the fragment gets smaller, Pollen and Trachtenberg suggest that perhaps such individuals have more vivid memories because they somehow have access to very large regions of their memory holograms. Conversely, perhaps most of us have memories that are much less vivid because our access is limited to smaller regions of the memory holograms. Intriguing. The transference of learned skills. Pribram believes the holographic model also sheds light on our ability to transfer learned skills from one part of our body to another. As you sit reading this book, take a moment and trace your first name in the air with your left elbow. Okay. You'll probably discover that this is a relatively easy thing to do, and yet in all likelihood it is something you have never done before. It may not seem a surprising ability to you, but in the classic view that various areas of the brain, such as the area controlling the movements of the elbow, are hardwired or able to perform tasks only after repetitive learning is caused the proper neural connections to become established between brain cells, this is something of a puzzle. Pribram points out that the problem becomes much more tractable if the brain were to convert all of its memories, including memories of learned abilities such as writing, into a language of interfering waveforms. Such a brain would be much more flexible and could shift its stored information around with the same ease that a skilled pianist transposes a song from one musical key to another. This same flexibility may also explain how we are able to recognize a familiar face regardless of the angle from which we are viewing it. Again, once the brain has memorized a face or any other object or scene and converted it into a language of waveforms, it can, in a sense, tumble this internal hologram around and examine it from any perspective that it wants. Phantom limb sensations and how we construct a world out there. Okay, cool. To most of us, it is obvious that our feelings of love, hunger, anger, and so on are our internal realities, and the sound of an orchestra playing, the heat of the sun, the smell of bread baking, and so on are external realities. But it is not so clear how our brains enable us to distinguish between the two. For example, so true for not true enough for some people. For example, Pribram points out that when we look at a person, the image of the person is really on the surface of our retinas. Yet we do not perceive the person as being on our retinas. We perceive them as being in the world out there. Similarly, when we stub our toe, we experience the pain in our toe. But the pain is not really in our toe. It is actually a neurophysiological process taking place somewhere in our brain. How then is our brain able to take the multitude of neurophysiological processes that manifest as our experience, all of which are internal, and fool us into thinking that some are internal and some are located beyond the confines of our gray matter? Creating the illusion that things are located where they are not is the quintessential feature of a hologram. Very true. As mentioned, if you look at a hologram, it seems to have extension in space, but if you pass your hand through it, you will discover there's nothing there. Despite what your senses tell you, no instrument will pick up the presence of any abnormal energy or substance where the hologram appears to be hovering. This is because a hologram is a virtual image, an image that appears to be where it is not, and possesses no more extension in space than does the three-dimensional image you see of yourself when you look in a mirror. Just as the image in the mirror is located in the silvering on the mirror's back surface, the actual location of a hologram is always in the photographic emulsion on the surface of the film recording it. Further evidence that the brain is able to fool us into thinking that inner processes are located outside the body comes from the Nobel Prize-winning physiologist Georges von Bekessy. I don't know. In a series of experiments conducted in the late 1960s, Bekessy, that's what I'm saying. Bekessy placed vibrators on the knees of blindfolded test subjects. Then he varied the rates at which the instruments vibrated. By doing so, he discovered that he could make his test subjects experience the sensation that a point source of vibration was jumping from one knee to the other. He found that he could even make his subjects feel the point source of vibration in the space between their knees. In short, he demonstrated that humans have the ability to seemingly experience sensation in spatial locations where they have absolutely no sense receptors. Right? Done that a few times. I don't know what I mean by that. Pribram believes that Bekessy's work is compatible with the holographic view and sheds additional light on how interfering wave fronts, or in Bekessy's case, interfering sources of physical vibration, enable the brain to localize some of its experiences beyond the physical boundaries of the body. He feels this process might also explain the phantom limb phenomenon, or the sensation experienced by some amputees that a missing arm or leg is still present. Such individuals often feel eerily realistic cramps, pains, and tinglings in these phantom appendages, but maybe what they are experiencing is the holographic memory of the limb that is still recorded in the interference patterns in their brains. Alright, next section. How long is this chapter? Oh, alright, we're going to finish the chapter. A few more pages. Now we're cooking. How long has it been? I can't believe I've been reading for almost an hour. Incredible. Experimental support for the holographic brain. For Pribram, the many similarities between brains and holograms were tantalizing, but he knew his theory didn't mean anything unless it was backed up by much more solid evidence. One researcher who provided such evidence was Indiana University biologist Paul Piech. Intriguingly, Piech began as an ardent disbeliever in Pribram's theory. He was especially skeptical of Pribram's claims that memories do not possess any specific location in the brain. To prove Pribram wrong, Piech devised a series of experiments, and as the test subjects of his experiments, he chose salamanders. In previous studies, he had discovered that he could remove the brain of a salamander without killing it, and although it remained in a stupor, as long as its brain was missing, its behavior In previous studies, he had discovered that he could remove the brain of a salamander without killing it, and although it remained in a stupor, as long as its brain was missing, its behavior completely returned to normal as soon as its brain was restored. Okay. Piech reasoned that if a salamander's feeding behavior is not confined to any specific location in the brain, then it should not matter how its brain is positioned in its head. If it did matter, Pribram's theory would be disproven. I don't get how that disproves it, but I'll read more. He then flip-flopped the left and right hemispheres of a salamander's brain, but to his dismay, as soon as it recovered, the salamander quickly resumed normal feeding. Oh, okay, right. So he's saying that flipping the hemispheres should have changed the feeding patterns, but it did not. Okay, right, because Pribram says it doesn't matter how the brain is placed. Okay, totally. He took another salamander and turned its brain upside down. When it recovered too, fed normally. Growing increasingly frustrated, he decided to resort to more drastic measures. In a series of over 700 operations, bro was locked in. He sliced, flipped, shuffled, subtracted, and even minced the brains of his hapless subjects. But always when he replaced what was left of their brains, their behavior returned to normal. These findings and others turned Piesch into a believer and attracted enough attention that his research became the subject of a segment on the television show 60 Minutes. Okay. He writes about this experience as well as giving detailed accounts of his experiments in his insightful book, Shuffle Brain. It's hilarious. Oh, now we're getting into it. The mathematical language of the hologram. Well, the theories that enabled the development of the hologram were first formulated in 1947 by Dennis Gabor, who later won a Nobel Prize for his efforts. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Prebrum's theory received even more persuasive experimental support. When Gabor first I don't fucking know. When Gabor first conceived the idea of a holography. When Gabor first received the idea of holography, he wasn't thinking about lasers. His goal was to improve the electron microscope, then a primitive and imperfect device. His approach was a mathematical one, and the mathematics he used was a type of calculus invented by an 18th century Frenchman named Jean Biget Fourier. Okay. Roughly speaking, what Fourier developed was a mathematical way of converting any pattern, no matter how complex, into a language of simple waves. He also showed how these waveforms could be converted back into the original pattern. In other words, just as a television camera converts an image into electromagnetic frequencies, and a television set converts those frequencies back into the original image, Fourier showed how a similar process could be achieved mathematically. The equations he developed to convert images into waveforms and back again are known as Fourier transforms. Fourier transforms enabled Gabor to convert a picture of an object into a blur of interference pattern on a piece of holographic film. They also enabled him to devise a way of converting those interference patterns back into an image of the original object. In fact, the special hole in every part of a hologram is one of the byproducts that occurs when an image or pattern is translated into the Fourier language of waveforms. I'm getting kind of deep in this now. Throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s, various researchers contacted Pribram and told him they had uncovered evidence that the visual system worked as a kind of frequency analyzer. Since frequency is a measure of the number of oscillations a wave undergoes per second, this strongly suggested that the brain might be functioning as a hologram does. But it wasn't until 1979 that Berkeley neurophysiologists Russell and Karen Devaloy made the discovery that settled the matter. Oh shit. Research in the 1960s had shown that each brain cell in the visual cortex is geared to respond to a different pattern. Some brain cells fire when the eyes see a horizontal line. Horizontal line. Others fire when the eyes sees a vertical line, and so on. As a result, many researchers concluded that the brain takes input from these highly specialized cells called feature detectors and somehow fits them together to provide us with our visual perceptions of the world. Despite the popularity of this view, the Devaloises felt it was only a partial truth. To test their assumption, they used Fourier's equations to convert plaid and checkerboard patterns into simple waveforms. Then they tested to see how the brain cells in the visual cortex responded to these new waveform images. What they found was that the brain cells responded not to the original patterns, but to the Fourier translations of the patterns. Only one conclusion could be drawn. The brain was using Fourier mathematics, the same mathematics holography employed, to convert visual images into the Fourier language of waveforms. The Devaloises' discovery was subsequently confirmed by numerous other laboratories around the world, and although it did not provide absolute proof the brain was a hologram, it supplied enough evidence to convince Pribram his theory was correct. Spurred on by the idea that the visual cortex was responding not to patterns, but to the frequencies of various waveforms, he began to reassess the role frequency played in other senses. It didn't take long for him to realize that the importance of this role had perhaps been overlooked by 20th century scientists. Over a century before the de Valois's discovery, the German physiologist and physicist Hermann von Helmholtz, oh, of course I don't struggle with that one, had shown that the ear was a frequency analyzer. More recent research, this reminds me of a dream I had. I'll talk about that later. More recent research revealed that our sense of smell seems to be based on what are called osmic frequencies. I'll look that up later. Bekisi's work had clearly demonstrated that our skin is sensitive to the frequencies of vibration, and he even produced some evidence that taste may involve frequency analysis. Interestingly, Bekisi also discovered that the mathematical equations that enabled him to predict how his subjects would respond to various frequencies of vibration were also of the Fourier genre. The dancer is a waveform. What's that? Are we human or are we dancer? But perhaps the most startling finding Pribram uncovered was Russian scientist Nikolai Bernstein's discovery that even our physical movements may be encoded in our brains in a language of Fourier waveforms. In the 1930s, Bernstein dressed people in black leotards and painted white dots on their elbows and other joints. Then he placed them against black backgrounds and took movies of them doing various physical activities such as dancing, walking, jumping, hammering, and typing. I'm so sorry you had to hear that. When he developed the film, only the white dots appeared, moving up and down and across the screen in various complex and flowing movements. To quantify his findings, he Fourier analyzed the various lines the dots traced out and converted them into a language of waveforms. To his surprise, he discovered the waveforms contained hidden patterns that allowed him to predict his subject's next movement to within a fraction of an inch. Very nice. When Pribram encountered Bernstein's work, he immediately recognized its implications. Maybe the reason hidden patterns surfaced after Bernstein Fourier analyzed his subject's movements was because that was how movements are stored in the brain. This was an exciting possibility, for if the brain analyzed movements by breaking them down into their frequency components, it explained the rapidity with which we learn many complex physical tasks. For instance, we do not learn to ride a bicycle by painstakingly memorizing every tiny feature of the process. We learn by grasping the whole flowing movement. Type shit. The fluid wholeness that typifies how we learn so many physical activities. It's difficult to explain if our brains are storing information in a bit-by-bit manner, but it becomes much easier to understand if the brain is Fourier analyzing such tasks and absorbing them as a whole. The reaction of the scientific community. Despite such evidence, Pribram's holographic model remains extremely controversial. Part of the problem is that there are many popular theories of how the brain works, and there is evidence to support them all. Some researchers believe the distributed nature of memory can be explained by the ebb and flow of various brain chemicals. Others hold that electrical fluctuations among large groups of neurons can account for the memory and learning. Each school of thought has its ardent supporters, and it is probably safe to say that most scientists remain unpersuaded by Pribram's arguments. For example, neuropsychologist Frank Wood of the Bowman Gray School of Medicine in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, feels that there are precious few experimental findings for which holography is the necessary or even preferable explanation. Pribram is puzzled by statements such as Wood's encounters by noting that he currently has a book in press with well over 500 references to such data. Real as fuck. Other researchers agree with Pribram. Dr. Larry Dosey, former chief of staff at Medical City Dallas Hospital, admits that Pribram's theory challenges many long-held assumptions about the brain, but points out that many specialists in brain function are attracted to the idea, if for no other reason than the glaring inadequacies of the present orthodox views. Neurologist Richard Restock author of the PBS series The Brain, shares Dosey's opinion. He notes that in spite of overwhelming evidence that human abilities are holistically dispersed throughout the brain, most researchers continue to cling to the idea that function can be located in the brain in the same way that cities can be located in the brain in the same way that cities can be located on a map. Rostock believes that theories based on this premise are not only oversimplistic, but actually function as conceptual straitjackets, okay, that keep us from recognizing the brain. Keep us from understanding the brain's true complexities. He feels that a hologram is not only possible, but at this moment represents probably our best model for brain functioning. Okay, we're so close, guys. Pribram encounters Bohm. Oh, it is about to heat up. As for Pribram, by the 1970s, enough evidence had accumulated to convince him his theory was correct. In addition, he had taken his ideas into the laboratory and discovered that single neurons in the motor cortex respond selectively, to a limited bandwidth of frequencies, a finding that further supported his conclusions. The question that began to bother him was, if the picture of reality in our brains is not a picture at all, but a hologram, what is it a hologram of? Type shit. The dilemma posed by this question is analogous to taking a Polaroid picture of a group of people sitting around a table, and after the picture develops, finding that instead of people, there are only blurry clouds of interference patterns positioned around the table. In both cases, one could rightfully ask, which is the true reality, the seemingly objective world experienced by the observer/photographer, or the blur of interference patterns recorded by the camera/the brain? Oh my God. Pribram realized that if the holographic brain model was taken to its logical conclusions, it opened the door on the possibility that objective reality, the world of coffee cups, coffee cups, mountain vistas, elm trees, and table lamps might not even exist, or at least not exist in the way we believe it exists. Was it possible, he wondered, that what the mystics had been saying for centuries was true? Reality was Maya, an illusion, and what was out there was really a vast resonating symphony of waveforms, a frequency domain, that's a good band name, frequency domain, that was transformed into the world as we know it only after it entered our senses. Realizing that the solution he was seeking might lie outside the province of his own field, he went to his physicist son for advice. His son recommended he look into the work of a physicist named David Bohm. When Pribram did, he was electrified. He not only found the answer to his question, but also discovered that according to Bohm, the entire universe was a hologram. All right. Tune in next week for Chapter 2, players.